Hello friends, my name is Marines, and this is the mid-year book freakout tag. I've been doing this rather consistently for the time that I've been on BookTube, and I love using it as a way to look back on the reading year, and I felt like it would be especially good to do it this year because there was a portion where I wasn't really uploading and wasn't talking about what I was reading, so this is a little bit of a catch-up. My reading in general has been a little bit all over the place. There hasn't been a ton that I've super loved or like a lot of new favorites of all time, but I have been reading consistently, and even during the time when I wasn't in the best reading mood and my mental health was not the best, I was still reading something. So we'll go over all of that in this tag. First up is my favorite read of the year so far. That is The Past is Read by Catherynne and Valente. This story is post-apocalyptic after a climate disaster that has basically covered the earth in water, and the only surviving humans are living on what is now the Great Garbage Patch, but that has grown exponentially bigger. Our main character is Tetli Abednego, who is a social pariah in her community, so we get to see her very unique perspective of being on the outs of the humans who have survived, but also these survivors don't have a very good view of us humans in the past and everything that we did to lead to this climate disaster. The character itself is an amazing balance. She has a very realistic sort of sense of the world, but an optimistic outlook, but the narrative voice is also very gritty. She curses a lot in here, so just the combination of things made her a really fully formed character to me and just a delight. I loved Tetli as a main character so much, and I just especially loved the narrative voice in this and how much this very short novella was able to just fully immerse me in this world, in her set of problems, and making my heart go out to her as a main character. And as always with Catherynne and Valente's writing, I just love it so much. It's so rich, it's so descriptive, and honestly, it has yet to let me down. Next is the best sequel that I've read this year so far, and I'm going to give that to Magic Shifts by Ilona Andrews. Now, if you've been around this channel for some time, you've probably heard me mention the Kate Daniel series on and off for some time, and it's because I've been reading through it for actual years. It's 10 books, which in the grand scheme of things is not a super long series, and the only reason it has taken me this long to read it is that I keep just rereading it. The first few books in the series have become comfort rereads for me, and so I'm always like, oh, I'll just go back and start over, and then I reread the first 5 and I'm like, that's enough. And I don't make any progress in the series. It doesn't help that book 6 is my least favorite of the series so far, and so I always get to that point and I'm like, but this year I finally just reread the first 5, made myself reread number 6, which wasn't as bad as my memory made it out to be. It's still my least favorite, and I understand why I had problems, especially problems with the miscommunication that happens in there, but it wasn't as bad as I had built it up in my memory, so it was fine. I reread it, and then I finally read books 7 and 8. 7 is also amazing, and I feel like 7 is a lot of people's favorite in the series. It was a really satisfying conclusion-ish to a lot of things that we had been building, and it was just a really interesting reset in the series overall. From what I understand, it was meant to be the end, but then they got the opportunity to write 3 more, so the way that it slots into that is really super interesting. I loved everything that it did for Kate Daniels as a main character, to show off how badass she was, but how natural a conclusion it really was, because all of the problems that we knew we were going to have from the beginning didn't get magically solved. She still was at a power deficit. She still had this really big enemy to face. All of those things were still true, but they got somewhat resolved in a way that felt natural. So that was amazing. But the reason I'm picking Magic Shifts is because this book kind of feels like early Kate Daniels to me. It goes back to a very investigative sort of monster of the week format that we saw in those early books, but now with all of the added benefit of the characterization that we've built up and the feelings I have for these characters. So it's the best of both worlds, and there was just something really fun about this, and I think this might be my favorite one in the series so far. Next is a new release that I haven't read yet, but that I want to. There are a ton of them, but I'm going to give it to Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse because I actually have a physical copy of this. I don't often buy physical copies of books that I haven't read yet. At least it's not my norm. form. But this was on sale at Barnes & Noble, and I loved Black Sun so much that I was like, surely this is a sure thing. Since then, I have heard a few mixed things about this, but I think even the ones that were like, this wasn't as good as the first one, still say that this was good. So I'm still feeling like this was a safe bet. And I really loved the first book. I haven't read it because I want to reread Black Sun. Did you see that coming? I just want to read them back to back. So I've kind of been holding out until I'm in like the mood. Next is my most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I kind of debated whether I would like look stuff up and be like, I'm excited for that. But that felt like it was, I don't know, not true to me in this moment, which me in this moment has absolutely no idea what's coming out in the second half of the year. I've been a little bit out of touch with like releases this year because again, I've been in such a weird reading mood. So I'm not sure. The only two books that I know for sure are coming out in the second half that I've got like on my radar are the new Mercy Thompson book and the new In Death series book. Those are the only two that I'm like, yep, gotta read it. If there are any others that you are excited for that you think should be on my radar, please let me know in the comments. Catch me up here. Next is the biggest surprise. And speaking of the In Death series, okay, I mentioned that I was in a weird or bad reading mood. When I get super stressed out or my mental health is not the best, I don't really escape into books. I feel like books can sometimes add to my stress. I'm an emotions first sort of reader. And so that means I often take on the stress of fiction. So I can shut down and not want to read books or consume media when I'm in that mood. But I will find myself either rereading or really like hyper fixating on one thing. And so that is to say that I've read pretty much all of the 54 books in the In Death series this year. I did start them previous to this year, but I really disliked the first book. I think I gave it 2 stars. It felt dated and there were some things with the main couple that just really rubbed me the wrong way and some non-con stuff that I didn't think was really meant to read that way. I thought it was meant to read romantic, but it came across really pushy and non-con to me. So I was like, I don't know that I want to keep reading this, but I did. Slowly. I picked up the next few and was kind of like feeling my way through it. But at the beginning of this year, I started just powering through this entire series. Not only am I current, I went back and I reread the first few that I was unsure about. So even the ones that I read for the first time last year, I have reread now this year. So truly, I feel like I've read all 54 books in the series, main books, and some of the like shorter novellas in between. Not all of them, but some of them this year. So that's where I'm at. And that is such a big surprise to me because number one, I suck at finishing series. I'm still talking about Kate Daniels, which I started years ago because of my inability to like make progress in a series. And 2, I really didn't like it in the beginning. But because this is a procedural, it just worked for my brain to really read this formulaic thing and invest in this cast of characters. It felt like a manageable amount of stress because I knew what was coming. I knew the players. I knew the formats and the formulas. It was perfect for me in this time. As I talk about this, people ask me if it's like recommended or if it's good. And to me, it's complicated. Number one, because it is ultimately propaganda. There are ways that it kind of separates itself from like propaganda because it is set in a future, and so these cops are not necessarily the cops we know, and there are certain things that have changed to make that so. For instance, guns are outlawed and nobody carries a gun. But there are moments for sure in the series where you see police abusing their power, and there are times that Eve Dallas like addresses that. Like we see her fighting for justice and like rooting out power abuses, but there are times that she kind of steps outside of the law to do what is right, but still steps outside of the law. So to see sort of that abuse of power in the context of 2022 wasn't always great. And in general, anybody who says no propaganda at all, I totally understand, but that's this. This is also really interesting to talk about in terms of like being good for my brain because it is graphic. It is full of murder and violence and gore and violence against women, and it has huge content warnings for rape and sexual assault. Our main character, Eve Dallas, was sexually assaulted as a child. And so much of this is about her PTSD and working through that and learning to trust people and accept people into her life when she's been very isolated as a result of growing up without a family and kind of having to make her own way. And it is often pretty graphic in the way that it places us in Eve's trauma. So there's a bunch of things like that that make it difficult to sort of universally recommend, but also I read the whole thing. It is addictive. It's got these characters that I've just invested so many feelings into. I love the found family that Eve sets up around herself. The mysteries are always so solid. I like the way that Nora Roberts writes her mysteries and the sort of like different formats that she cycles through in each of these books. I'm really grateful to the series for making sure that I could continue reading this year, even when I felt like I was not in a reading mood. Like, I'm really happy that I found these. My biggest disappointment this year was probably Jade City by Fonda Lee. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, so it wasn't like a totally bad time, but I expected to love it. And I talked so much about how much I expected to love it because it was a House Salt pick and we were all super excited for it. So that when I got to it and it was like a 3-star read, I just truly felt disappointment. Unfortunately, it fell a little flat to me in a number of ways, primarily because I don't think it gave enough to be sort of like a plot-driven book, but it also didn't give enough characterization to be a character-driven book. So it fell somewhere in the middle where we had this entire cast of characters that it was really difficult to keep track of for a long time into the book. And it also had these moments of action, but mostly it was just like sitting around and talking. It was very political drama in that way, where it was a lot of like people meeting and talking to each other. But because we didn't have the investment in the characters, or I didn't at least, like the sitting around and talking wasn't as interesting to me. There were portions of the world that were super cool, but it just felt very limited in its scope and its view of the world. And I don't know, it left me wanting. I wish it were shorter, or I wish there were less characters or less character point of views. I wish we got to spend more time with the characters I actually liked, or I wish it would have picked up on the action and cut out some of that like sitting around and talking, but it didn't. So overall, it was just kind of a fine experience for me. This tag asks for your favorite fictional crush, but fictional crushes is not like a thing that I think about or how I frame characters at all. So instead, I'm going to substitute this with my worst book, The Zodiac Academy by Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valente. What a steaming pile of warmed up garbage. My God. It is poorly written and edited, incredibly flat characters in an alternating point of view that really had no differentiation between the voice. It could have crossed out the names and just switched them and nothing about the story would have changed. It is billed as a slow burn bully romance, but what that actually means is that you get absolutely no romance in this first book. All you get is bullying, and any sort of sexual tension that exists is a product of that bullying and like manipulation and sexual assault. So we just spend hundreds and hundreds of too many pages watching 2 young girls get bullied and assaulted by pretty much everybody in their life. You sprinkle on top of that some like casual racism and some casual fat phobia, and I did not have a single fun time in this entire book. I did not enjoy a single word in this entire book. I do not understand what the appeal is here. My runners up are probably The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon, which I think when I finished reading it, I was like, oh, it wasn't that bad. But in retrospect, I'm like, oh, it was pretty damn bad. I honestly couldn't tell you any of the details from this book I read a couple of months ago because it was so forgettable. Everything was so underdeveloped that none of it even mattered. And Stormfront by Jim Butcher, which was also underdeveloped, both the characters and the world, and heaped on its serving of misogyny on top, so that even the things that were like fine became disgusting under the weight of the misogyny. Next is my favorite new authors. So for me, favorite books are books that I've read more than once, and favorite authors are kind of that too. They have to be authors that I've read more than one work from and really enjoyed. So I'm not sure that anybody really fits into that category. I did read 2 more Catherynne and Valente books this year, and it has cemented her as one of my favorite authors of all time. And as I already mentioned, Nora Roberts was my hero of the year and has now become my most Dread author of all time. What a twist. Next is a book that made me cry, and that is Catherynne Jammer by Francesca Zappia. I read this pretty recently. It is a book about a girl who's trapped inside of her high school with a bunch of her classmates, and half of the population is changing in really weird and unexplained ways, and she can't remember why she's trapped in here. So we start experiencing her life and flashing back in her memories as she does, as she starts to put together why she's trapped there and who exactly is coming after the students in the school and killing them off one by one. This was not emotional in like a subtle way or like in a crept up on me way. It felt emotional like A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, where you go in like knowing that this is just an emotional topic and it's going to sort of like prey on your emotions in that way. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that there's a difference between like going in knowing that it's going to be a heavy topic versus something that catches you off guard. But it was all pretty effective and it got me. It got me right in the feels. It got me in the heart. It was not only that like I cried, but that I just felt like, I don't know, very overwhelmed by what I experienced in this book. I think the make it or break it element will just be how much you relate to the main character and what she is going through, and I did. And so that helped this like building sense of dread where I saw where we were headed and I hated it, and then we went there and I hated it. So tears. Next is a book that made me happy, and I'll go with Witchlings by Claribel A. Ortega. I love picking up middle grade fantasy for like making me happy and giving me the warm fuzzies, and this absolutely delivered. It is about a young witch who on her day to get sorted into her coven doesn't get a coven and is a spare. And to make matters worse, when it's time to seal the spare coven, it doesn't work, and so they don't come into their magic and they have to take on an impossible task in order to seal their coven and become full-blown witches instead of witchlings. I love Ortega's writing. I find it so smooth and easy to read. I really loved everything that this said about friends and community and finding your place. It just had a warm, uplifting message in a way that was age appropriate but not condescending. It had all of these bits of humor and levity that just made it really fun to read. And overall, I felt like I was smiling the whole time, even as they were like on an adventure and like going up against difficult things. I was just like the whole time. So mission accomplished. Next is the most beautiful book that I bought this year, and I have been really enjoying these Marjolaine Baston editions of classics. There is something a little like old lady about them or like, I don't know, maybe like Thomas Kinkade about them, you know what I mean? But I really love them. So they've all got this floral print and they've got illustrations inside, but they also come with like extras inside, so like family trees and like letters and things, so that as you're reading you can discover like the additional things that are inside. So far I have Jane Eyre and Emma. I love the way that they look. I'm really excited to reread from them so I can kind of go through and see what's inside as well. And the final question is the books that I need to read by the end of the year. My TBR is out of control. You guys watch me do a whole like unhaul TBR project, but it's at the point where I need to go through my TBR again because I feel like I haven't made a lot of movement on those books. I've been reading things and adding things here, but a lot of the books that like are on this TBR shelf are still on it from when I did my unhaul project in 2020. So it's time to come to terms with some things that maybe I just don't want to read and I just have to reevaluate. So in general, just like I have to read books on my shelf, period. But these are the ones that for sure I want to get to by the end of the year. Magic Binds and Magic Triumphs, which are books 9 and 10 in the Kate Daniel series, bringing me to the end. I'm gonna do it. This is it. That's it. I am going to do it. And then I can move on to more of Ilona Andrews' series, which I'm very excited about, but I haven't because I just want to finish this one off first. Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This was a House Salt pick, but I was unable to attend that live show, so I know everybody in House Salt really enjoyed it, and in general, her books are very well loved. I have enjoyed a lot of the Emily Henry that I've read in the past, so I have high hopes for this, and I've been just kind of saving it up also. I do this a lot, where it's like a book that I suspect I will like, so I like save it for the moment. So I've just kind of been saving this, but I know that I want to read it before the end of the year. House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I'm doing a project where I'm recapping every chapter in this book, and it's a little ambitious to think that I am going to finish this out by the end of the year because it takes so long to go through chapter by chapter, but I want to. I don't want to carry this into like a multiple year project. Please, I cannot do that to myself. So we just need to figure out a timeline here and get to it. I've got 6 months to wrap this baby up. We're going to do it. And finally, The City of Brass and Spinning Silver. These 2 books have been the books that have been on my currently reading shelf on Goodreads the longest. Multiple years now, so I either need to finish them up or give it up and decide that they are DNFs. I didn't stop reading Spinning Silver because I wasn't enjoying it. I just kind of put it aside and then fell into a reading rut, and this was like multiple years ago, and now it's just been really difficult to pick back up, and I have tried multiple times, but I also don't want to start from the beginning because I remember so much of what I read. And so I'm kind of stuck in this weird middle ground where I don't know what to do with this. Like, I don't want to DNF because it wasn't bad, but it isn't a book that is easily like set aside and jumped back into. And then with City of Brass, I did start over with this one and I started reading. I've made it to 50 pages so far, and it's a little bit slow going. I can tell that it's slow because it's laying out a really expansive world and like a really detailed world, but nothing has hooked me so far, and it's such a big story to sort of push my way through. I think I might try and give it like another 50 pages, but that's all I can commit to. But I need to do that and either DNF or like find what's going to hook me. That's it for me today. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I mentioned, let's chat in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.